Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the heavy-caliber pistol pressed cold and unforgiving against his temple, the metal biting into skin that had once been likened to flawless porcelain, but was now smeared with mud and dried blood. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning the training ground of Sector 4 into a quagmire of misery, but Julian Vane didn't blink. He didn't tremble. He simply looked up, his violet eyes burning with a defiance that shouldn't belong to a fallen aristocrat, staring straight into the abyss of the man holding the gun. Thunder cracked overhead, illuminating the scar that ran down the commander's face, a jagged line of violence on a visage of terrifying beauty. "Pull it," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse but steady, the sound cutting through the storm. "Pull the trigger, Kalen. Or are you afraid that killing me will finally prove I won?" 3 months earlier, Julian Vane would have fainted at the sight of a firearm, let alone dared a man like Kalen Thorne to use one. Julian was the crown jewel of the Vane family, a dynasty built on pharmaceuticals and high society politics. He was 22, possessed of a beauty that was almost sharp in its perfection, silver blonde hair, slight of frame, and accustomed to a life where his hardest decision was choosing which vintage wine to pair with dinner. But dynasties crumble. When his father was indicted for treason against the coalition, the family assets were frozen, the reputation shattered. To avoid prison, a deal was struck. The Vane heir would enlist in the Black Ridge Citadel, the most brutal special forces training camp in the hemisphere. It was a death sentence disguised as a reprieve. The arrival was a spectacle of cruelty. The transport truck dumped Julian and 40 other recruits into the mud of the outer perimeter. While others scrambled to stand, Julian took a moment to wipe the filth from his cheek, his expression one of utter disdain. That was when he saw him. Standing on the raised platform, flanked by 2 armed guards, was Commander Kalen Thorne. They called him the Iron Wolf. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and encased in a black tactical uniform that seemed to absorb the light around him. His hair was the color of raven feathers, swept back to reveal a face that was handsome in a severe, predatory way. But it was his eyes, amber, like a wolf in winter, that froze the blood in Julian's veins. Kalen descended the stairs, his boots crunching on the gravel. The silence in the yard was absolute. He stopped in front of a shivering recruit, corrected his posture with a brutal shove, and moved on. Then, he stopped before Julian. Julian lifted his chin. He was determined not to look like a victim. Kalen stared down at him, his gaze raking over Julian's delicate features, the expensive cut of his hair, the soft hands that had never known labor. "So," Kalen said, his voice a low, vibrating baritone that resonated in Julian's chest. "This is the Vane boy, the little prince." "I am Cadet Vane," Julian corrected, his voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts. Kalen's lips quirked into a sneer. He reached out, his gloved hand gripping Julian's chin, forcing his head up. The grip was iron hard. "You are not a cadet. You are a liability. You are soft meat in a cage of wolves. Do you know why you are here, Prince?" "To serve my country," Julian recited the script. "Wrong," Kalen murmured, leaning in close enough that Julian could smell the scent of rain, gun oil, and tobacco. "You are here because your father bought your life with his silence. But he didn't pay me. I don't want trash in my unit. Ring the bell by the gate, Vane. Quit now, and save us both the time." "I won't quit," Julian snapped, slapping Kalen's hand away. The entire courtyard gasped. No one touched the Iron Wolf. Kalen looked at his hand, then back at Julian. The amber eyes darkened. "You won't quit." He stepped back, his voice projecting across the yard. "Everyone, run 10 laps around the perimeter. Full packs." He pointed a finger at Julian. "Except him. He runs until he passes out. If he stops, you all start over." That was the beginning of hell. For the next 6 weeks, Kalen made it his personal mission to break Julian Vane. It wasn't just training, it was persecution. When the unit ate, Julian was given half rations. When they slept, Julian was assigned guard duty. During combat drills, Kalen paired Julian with the largest, most aggressive recruits, watching him passively as the little prince was beaten into the dirt. But a strange thing happened. The porcelain didn't shatter. It chipped, it cracked, but it held. Julian lost weight, his cheekbones becoming sharper, his eyes more haunted, but his body hardened. The soft, pampered flesh was replaced by lean, whipcord muscle. He stopped complaining. He stopped looking for pity. He simply endured, fueled by a hatred for Kalen Thorne that burned brighter than any sun. The dynamic shifted one rainy Tuesday in the mud pit. They were practicing hand-to-hand combat. Julian was exhausted, his body screaming in protest. His opponent was a brute named Miller, who enjoyed Kalen's favor because of his mindless aggression. Miller threw Julian into the muck, raising a fist to smash his nose. "Enough," a voice commanded. Kalen stepped into the ring. He kicked Miller away as if he were a stray dog. "You're fighting like a brawler, not a soldier." Kalen spat at Miller, then turned his gaze to Julian, who was struggling to his knees, coughing up mud. "Get up, Vane." Julian staggered to his feet, swaying. "Attack me," Kalen ordered. Julian wiped blood from his lip. "Sir, you heard me. You have so much hate in those pretty eyes. Use it. Try to kill me." Julian didn't hesitate. He launched himself at the commander. It was sloppy, desperate, driven by weeks of humiliation. Kalen sidestepped easily, tripping Julian, sending him face-first into the dirt. "Weak," Kalen taunted. Julian scrambled up and lunged again. Again, Kalen threw him down. "Pathetic. Is this the best the aristocracy can offer?" Julian screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and charged. This time, instead of a straight punch, he feinted. When Kalen moved to block, Julian dropped low, sweeping his leg. It shouldn't have worked. Kalen was a master, but the sheer audacity of the move caught the commander off guard. Kalen stumbled. He didn't fall, but his balance broke for a fraction of a second. Julian didn't stop. He tackled Kalen, driving a knee into the commander's stomach, pinning him against the wooden barrier of the ring. For a heartbeat, they were chest to chest, Julian's forearm pressed against Kalen's throat. Time seemed to freeze. Rain plastered their hair to their skulls. Julian was panting, his heart hammering against his ribs, staring wildly into Kalen's eyes. He expected rage. He expected a beating. Instead, he saw something flicker in those amber depths. Heat. A dark, twisted approval. Kalen didn't push him off immediately. He let Julian hold him there, feeling the younger man's trembling exertion. Kalen's hand came up, not to strike, but to grip Julian's hip, grounding him. "Better," Kalen whispered, his voice rough. "But you're still wide open." With a sudden twist of his hips, Kalen reversed their positions. In a blur of motion, Julian was pinned against the wood, Kalen's heavy body pressing him down. The dominance was absolute. Kalen's face was inches from Julian's, their breath mingling in the cold air. "You have fire, Prince," Kalen murmured, his gaze dropping to Julian's bruised lips. "Let's see if it lasts." He released Julian and walked away, leaving the recruit sliding down the wall, legs shaking, not from exhaustion, but from an electric shock that had nothing to do with combat. The turning point came during the Frost March, a 72-hour survival exercise in the northern mountains. It was dangerous terrain, known for sudden avalanches and roaming insurgent scouts from the borderlands. Julian's squad was navigating a narrow ridge when disaster struck. A shelf of snow gave way. Julian, tethered to the rear, was dragged over the edge. "Vane!" The shout tore through the howling wind. Kalen, who had been overseeing the drill from the vanguard, didn't hesitate. While others froze, the commander threw himself flat, grabbing the rope just as the anchor piton snapped. The jolt nearly dislocated Kalen's shoulder. He groaned, gritting his teeth, holding the weight of the falling recruit with one arm. "Climb!" Kalen roared. "Climb, you idiot!" Julian scrambled up the icy face, terror lending him strength. When he finally flopped over the ledge, gasping, he looked up to see Kalen clutching his shoulder, face pale. "Commander?" Julian reached out. "Back!" Kalen snarled, pushing him away. "Move out. We're sitting ducks here." But the commotion had attracted attention. A crack echoed, not ice, but a sniper rifle. Kalen jerked, blood blooming on his thigh. "Ambush!" someone screamed. Chaos erupted. In the confusion of returning fire and seeking cover, Kalen dragged himself behind a rock formation, his leg useless. The squad was pinned down. "Go!" Kalen ordered Julian, who was crouching beside him. "Flank them left. Take the squad. I'm not leaving you, Julian said, ripping a strip of cloth from his uniform to bind Kalen's wound. That's an order, cadet. Screw your orders, Julian shouted back, tightening the tourniquet so hard Kalen hissed. You saved me. I'm not leaving you to die in the snow. The insurgents were closing in. There was a cave system nearby, a narrow fissure in the rock. Help me up, Kalen gritted out, realizing arguing was futile. Julian shouldered Kalen's weight, staggering under the heavy, muscular frame. They practically fell into the fissure, sliding down into darkness just as bullets chipped the stone entrance. They were safe from the fire, but they were trapped. And the temperature was dropping. The cave was small, damp, and freezing. Kalen leaned against the wall, his breathing shallow. The gunshot wound was through and through, but the blood loss was significant. He was going into shock. Commander. Kalen, Julian said, his voice trembling. He checked the wound. It had stopped bleeding, but Kalen's skin was ice cold. Leave me, Kalen mumbled, his eyes half closed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deadly fatigue. They'll send a retrieval team. Just stay quiet. Shut up, Julian said. He began unbuckling his own tactical vest. You're hypothermic. What are you doing? Kalen's eyes fluttered open, hazy. Body heat, Julian stated, trying to keep his voice clinical, though his cheeks burned. It's standard protocol. He stripped off his outer layers, leaving only his thermal undershirt, and began to strip Kalen as well. The commander was too weak to protest. When Julian pulled Kalen's shirt off, he paused. Kalen's torso was a tapestry of scars. Burn marks, knife wounds, bullet holes. A map of a life spent in war. It was terrifying and strangely beautiful. Julian pressed his body against Kalen's, wrapping his arms around the broader man's waist, trying to transfer every ounce of his warmth. Kalen groaned low in his throat, his head dropping onto Julian's shoulder. You're warm, Kalen slurred. Stay with me, Julian whispered, rubbing Kalen's back. Why do you hate me so much, Kalen? Tell me so I can fix it. Kalen was quiet for a long time. The wind howled outside. I don't hate you, he finally rasped. I hate what you represent. Softness. Weakness. In this world, soft things die. I wanted you to leave, so you wouldn't die. Julian pulled back slightly, looking into Kalen's face. The commander was delirious, his barriers down. You tried to break me to save me? Julian asked, incredulous. Didn't work. Kalen let out a dry, pained chuckle. You're stubborn. Like a weed. A poplar tree. Growing in concrete. Kalen's eyes focused on Julian. The intensity returned, but it wasn't the cold glare of the instructor. It was hunger. A man starved of tenderness, suddenly drowning in it. Julian, Kalen whispered. It was the first time he had used his given name. Before Julian could respond, Kalen's hand came up, tangling in Julian's hair, pulling him down. The kiss tasted of iron and snow. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, a collision of two souls who had been circling each other like gladiators. Kalen kissed him as if he were trying to devour him, and Julian met him with equal force, pouring all his frustration, his anger, and his confused longing into the contact. When they broke apart, breathless, Kalen rested his forehead against Julian's. If we get out of here, Kalen growled, I am going to make your life harder than you can imagine. Julian smirked, stroking the scar on Kalen's cheek. Promise. They were rescued 14 hours later. The return to Black Ridge was a blur of medical bays and debriefings. But the atmosphere had changed. The recruits whispered. Julian Vane had dragged the Iron Wolf out of hell. He was no longer the little prince. He was one of them. But the peace was short-lived. 2 weeks later, Julian was summoned to the administrative block. He expected a commendation. Instead, he found chaos. Internal affairs officers were swarming the office. Kalen was there, standing tall despite his healing leg, stripped of his rank insignia. Beside him stood Colonel Drake, a man known for his rivalry with Kalen. Cadet Vane, Drake smiled, a serpent's grin. Perfect timing. We were just discussing Commander Thorne's negligence. Negligence. Julian looked at Kalen. Kalen stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The ambush in the north, Drake said smoothly. Intelligence suggests Commander Thorne led the squad into a known insurgent trap. Perhaps to sell state secrets? Or perhaps incompetence. It was a lie. A blatant, political maneuver to remove Kalen. Drake had likely sold the route himself. Tell them, Vane, Drake continued. He endangered you. He was reckless. Testify against him, and I'll sign your discharge papers. You can go home to your mansions and your wine. You'll be free. The room went silent. This was the trap. Julian's freedom in exchange for Kalen's career and likely his life. Kalen finally looked at Julian. His eyes were guarded, devoid of the heat from the cave. Go, his eyes seemed to say. Take the exit. Julian looked at the discharge papers on the desk. He looked at Drake's smug face. Then he looked at Kalen. He remembered the mud. He remembered the cave. He remembered the man who tried to break him so he wouldn't shatter. Julian picked up the papers. The room held its breath. Slowly, deliberately, Julian tore the papers in half. Then in quarters. He let the confetti rain down on Drake's desk. Commander Thorne followed protocol. Julian lied, his voice steady and cold as ice. I was the one who misread the map. I led us into the valley. If you want to court-martial someone, court-martial me. Drake's face turned purple. You insolent little. I am a Vane. Julian interrupted, stepping forward, drawing on every ounce of aristocratic arrogance he had tried to suppress. My father may be disgraced, but my uncle sits on the oversight committee. If you touch Commander Thorne without concrete proof, I will ensure an investigation is launched into your financial accounts, Colonel. I hear the insurgents pay well for routes. It was a bluff. A massive, dangerous bluff. But Julian delivered it with the poise of a king. Drake faltered. He didn't know how much power the Vane family still held. Get out, Drake hissed. Both of you. Outside, the rain had started again. Kalen grabbed Julian's arm, dragging him into the shadow of a supply hangar. He pinned Julian against the wall, much like he had in the mud pit weeks ago. You're an idiot, Kalen growled, though his hands were trembling slightly where they gripped Julian's shoulders. You could have gone home. I am home, Julian replied softly. Kalen stared at him, searching for deceit, finding only resolve. The commander let out a shuddering breath and leaned in, resting his forehead on Julian's shoulder. It was a gesture of surrender. The wolf had been tamed, not by force, but by loyalty. You risked everything, Kalen murmured. You risked your life for me on that cliff, Julian countered. He lifted his hand, tracing the line of Kalen's jaw. Besides, who else is going to keep you in line, sir? Kalen pulled back, a smirk ghosting his lips, a true smile, rare and devastating. 10 laps, Vane. Right now. Seriously? Julian groaned. You disobeyed a superior officer's glare in there, Kalen whispered, leaning closer, his lips brushing Julian's ear. Run. And when you're done, come to my quarters. We have a lot of debriefing to do. Julian shivered, the heat coiling in his stomach. He pushed Kalen back, his eyes flashing with playful defiance. Yes, sir. He turned and began to run into the rain, his boots splashing in the mud. He was cold, he was tired, and he was miles from the luxury he was born into. But as he looked back and saw the dark silhouette of the Iron Wolf watching him, Julian Vane knew he had never been stronger. And that is how the Viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian take control and bring the commander to his knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who broke you just to build you back up? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece. Best quality. High res. 1.2. Korean manhwa style. Semi-realistic. Digital art. 2 men. BL. Yaoi. Man 1. Commander Kalen. Tall muscular build. Sharp jawline. Facial scar. Short black hair. Wearing black tactical military uniform. Intense amber eyes. Dominant stance. Man 2. Julian Vane. Slim, elegant build. Silver blonde hair. Violet eyes. Wearing disheveled cadet uniform. Defiant expression. Looking up. Background is a dark, rainy military training ground at night. Mud. And rain texture. Dramatic rim lighting. Intense eye contact. Tension. Cinematic composition. Depth of field.